Good evening, everybody. Happy Christmas and Hanukkah, and uh, what I keep saying is Vaccine New Year. Vaccine New Year to everybody. Um, this is a true panel for December. We are glad to have you with us, and I'd like to have a conversation tonight about some things that are pretty important right now. We want to talk about arts and activism. It's a topic that feels more important than it has in a long time. Um, we want to talk about how theater can help to promote some healthy changes that need to happen in our country. It's not a secret. We all know that we're we're under the siege of a pandemic, yes, and that's hard enough. But on top of that, we're also becoming very aware of some basic troubling things that are happening socially and culturally within our country. Um, so the question is, how vital is theater? How vital can art be to help make changes happen that need to happen um, in this world, not just in the country, but in the world itself? So that's a very broad opening. So you're going to meet Gayle Waxenberg from NewYorkRep, and Jane Dubin, who's representing Houses on the Moon, a theater company. Ludovica is the founder of Parity Productions, and she'll tell you more about that. And Adam Hyndman works with Mara Isaacs at Octopus Theatricals, but also has some companies that he's involved with as well that are specifically about initiating some social change that needs to happen really quick. So I'm going to ask my panelists to come on and one at a time and tell you more about them. I'm just basically giving you some brief overview of who they are. I'm going to do it from my view in terms of who's here in the order that I see them. So Gayle, how about if you come on and tell us a little bit about NewYorkRep and what you do?
Okay, all good? You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm one of the co-founders and executive directors of NewYorkRep, and our whole mission is to produce art that has the ability to begin conversations about issues that are going on in our world that are impacting our lives today. And interestingly, most of our productions and the stories we tell are inspired by real life stories. So why we might want to take on, let's say, the topic of the opioid crisis, it will be inspired by somebody whose life was impacted by the opioid crisis. So that's something it's very unique to what we do. We've covered topics like gun control, sexual assault. We're working on a piece about prison reform. We are coming out in January with 4 mini pieces, 10-minute pieces on racism written by 4 playwrights of color, particularly about how racism affects them in their day-to-day life. All of our productions are followed by town hall talkbacks when they provoke intense feelings on subject matters that are raw. We always have social workers available should somebody be provoked in the audience. And the idea is really just to start a conversation that can propel a new way to think about something with the hope that it will equate to some kind of change.
Well,
and that's it in a nutshell.
that's a nice nutshell.
Yeah.
It's similar to Jane's nutshell, I think, but
Yeah.
Jane will be more specific about Houses on the Moon. Jane is actually the chairman of the board of Houses on the Moon.
Is that my cue?
That's your cue.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jane Dubin, and yes, I am now the chair of the board of Houses on the Moon Theater Company, and I've been with them for 10 years of their almost 20. And we have a very simple mission, which is to amplify the unheard voice. And much like Gayle described, we're looking at topics that aren't in the mainstream of conversation in theater. And those topics include our play Shared Sentences, which is stories of family members who have people who are incarcerated, hence the title Shared Sentences. We've done plays about the impact of gun violence. We've done plays about the impact of bullying on LGBTQ teens, and the list goes on. Our process generally starts with workshops that are done with people who are intrinsically connected to the subject matter. So, for example, our stories of gun violence had people who were on both sides of the gun impacted. It culminated in a project called Gun Country, which was stories, sort of a moth on steroids. And out of that process came our play, The Assignment, which really was based on the relationship that two people developed in the workshop. One who had been, one who had been the victim of violence, with her son having been killed randomly, and then someone who had been a perpetrator of gun violence and had served a substantial sentence in prison. And they developed a very strong relationship, friendship in that workshop, and it turned into a play. And like Gayle talked about, many of our subjects involve pretty intense conversations. We do have talkbacks afterwards. And 2 years ago, when we brought back our signature play, De Novo, which was about the immigration and the asylum process, it was in the midst of, I don't know what the right word is, the ruckus, the tumult of so much of the deportation under the Trump administration. And we found that we had to do talkbacks every night because people were so disturbed, and we had immigration attorneys and such there. So that's a little bit of what we do. I have to say that I am humbled and very proud, if those two things can be in the same sentence, to be associated with amazing artists. I know this group can understand that working in this area, there are a lot of people who try to work in this area, have very good intentions. The conversations are always good. The theater isn't always the best. I think, Bob, you've selected some of the highlights here, which is great. But I'm really proud to work with amazing theater artists who always make the work the thing.
Thank you, Jane. I'm going to move to Ludovica now. Ludovica, you've created an entire company with the intention of making social change. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Thank you, Bob, and hello, everybody. Both fellow panelists who, I mean, amazing. I'm honored to be on the same panel with you. It's like, wow. And also attendees, many of whom I know. So hello, hello. And thank you for inviting me. So Parity Productions, which I founded, I'm the executive and artistic director in 2016, actually is the love child, I like to say that, of two other companies, Works by Women, which was an advocacy company specifically created to try to affect change in the way of put your money where your mouth is and make choices of which theatre pieces you're going to go and see. And we advocated for productions that had a 50% representation, specifically writers, directors, and designers, not for profit. And then VH Theatrical, which was my theatrical theatre company, not for profit also. And then we found that we were doing very much similar things. And it's like, you really want to run two not-for-profits? I don't think so. And so we took the best from both companies and created Parity Productions. I mean, so that's the history of it. And what do we do? So, well, firstly, we love the theatre. So let's start with that. We believe in equal opportunity. Therefore, we've made it our mission to elevate the voices of women and TGNC, which is trans and gender non-conforming artists, in the cultural dialogue of theatre through both art and advocacy. So two of the platforms that we brought over from Works by Women are the Qualifying Productions Program. So we promote other people's productions as long as they have the 50-50 representation I spoke about. So it's a press release, it's on the website, it's on social media. It's actually a very important program, especially considering that the New York Times and other media outlets started shrinking their coverage of independent theatre. And so all of a sudden it became an important program. Of course, we've been dead as a doornail since April of this year. Why April, you may ask? Because we created an archive of COVID impacted qualifying productions so that forevermore you could actually go and see what were the qualifying productions before COVID decided it has to all stop. And then the second thing we do is an artist database, the Women and Trans and Gender Non-Conforming Artists, we call it WTAD, Artist Database. And again, it's the same 3 genres, the same 3 disciplines, which is writers, directors, and designers, free profile for each, very simple profiles, but it's where you can be found and where producers can find the artists. And both these advocacy programs came about from need, seeing myself, what was needed, and seeing how many artists were not being represented. And then when you spoke to producers about it, or artistic directors, or those in the position to hire, they're basically like, well, we don't know where to find these women, or we don't know where to find. I'm like, that's a really pathetic excuse, but I understand you. If you don't know, you don't know. So therefore we must create the tools to affect the change and not criticize, because that actually does absolutely nothing. And it's working. I mean, I don't know how much we've moved the needle, but I think, I think we have made some change. So I should probably be quiet now because other people
say to all of my if you mention anything like a database or whatever, do me a favor and type it into the chat when you get a chance so people can actually follow up and find it. I'm gonna move to Adam now, and I'm actually going to ask you about what you do at of course with Octopus, but also apart from Octopus. And I want to actually ask you whether you feel that I'm using the right word when I say arts and activism, and because what you and Dominique do really is activism. Is there any difference between what we're talking about in the arts as being activism and what you do politically?
Thanks, Bob. No, I think that this panel and this space is one that is so needed, because so much of the work that I'm engaged with is about bridging those gaps. So often our activism is removed from our artistry when in fact they're symbiotic. So of course, as you were mentioning, as a producer with Octopus, we're a very nimble, small producing company that is committed to daring work. And part of our vision and our mission is grounded in having an active anti-racist and progressive vision where that work has a seat at every table, not just in a specific lane. So around, especially this year's movement towards Black lives, the work that I've been doing in many different arenas, all of a sudden got a lot of spotlight, a lot of attention. And it's important to say that because these movements are not new, right? And the work that's being done has persisted through this time, but I've been very fortunate to engage with 2 specific initiatives in a very foundational way. One is with the formation of Broadway For Racial Justice, which is a not-for-profit serving the industry. It operates as an ombudsman. It operates as a advocate. It operates to provide space and resources for folks of color navigating and working in the sphere, not just with crisis intervention and helping as I mentioned, an advocate through a process that you might be experiencing racial trauma, but also in immediate support, in micro grants, in amplification of work, in training and mentorship building. And that looks like a very decentralized model for community uplifting, not just amplifying one method, but looking at how we can look at an ecosystem building together. The other initiative is the Industry Standard Group, which is a BIPOC community fund, which is the first of its kind, using principles of collective economics to provide direct pathways for BIPOC investors and producers to engage in the commercial theater realm.
Can I ask you to talk a little bit about how you bridge between the political and the artistic? What are the specific bridges that you build?
Sure. For myself, I think it looks like I'll offer some insights that I think can be universal, which is starting with your own interrogation of where you are in the spectrum of your social location, right? So as a queer multiracial man, my very proximity to certain levels and structures of privilege necessitates my activism. It necessitates my engagement, right? But just because I am in certain matrices of marginalization, doesn't mean that I don't have to continue to do the work to see where I am an ally, where my activism is needed, right? Because I still contain various levels of privilege. So it really does begin with our own interrogation. And if we are artists that have vision and missions that are values led, I think that brings up an integrity question, right? Does the mission that my art wants to manifest, is it actually, who is it benefiting? Who is it supporting? And how can I move closer to that kind of right relationship and the allyship that I want to see in the world?
Thank you. That's great. It's an interesting and thought-provoking answer. We're going to move to Dominique, and Dominique, tell us a little bit about what you do. Many of us know what you do.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Bob, for having me. I mean, this is like, I don't get impressed easily, but I've just been like listening in on the room, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is amazing. This room is incredible. I'm so honored and blessed to be here. You guys are like all my idols, like everything I want to be like is in this room. So thank you for having me. What I do, I am the National Director of Membership at National Action Network. National Action Network is one of the leading civil rights organizations in the country. It was founded in 1991 by my father, Reverend Al Sharpton. And it is a model for taken from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the model of fighting injustice in a nonviolent way. And what we do is we really push demonstration to legislation. How do we affect demonstration, and how does it affect, how do we demonstrate and how does it affect legislation? And so what that means is we advocate on issues that are prevalent, especially to people of color, but to all those who are face injustice or face crisis in America. We fight for them, we advocate for the issues, and we demonstrate. And that, that is to target and to strategize to affect legislation. So what our goal is to change the laws, and that is systemic change. That is effective systemic change. How these policies are directly involved with the action and the engagement that we advocate for. And this year alone has been tremendously difficult for so many reasons. But for one, we have, as a country, finally been exposed. We've been exposed the issues that people of color have been dealing with, for so long, was exposed in a very unique but powerful way this year, because everyone had to focus on these issues. They were brought in, they were opened, and brought into the light in such a drastic way. And so, now we as activists who have been doing this work for so long, I'm 34, I was born into this movement, we now have to shift and now deal with not only confronting the issues, but also dealing with a global health crisis in this country and how everyone is affected by issues. Everyone is suffering in some capacity, and how we meet those needs. So for one thing we've done this year, we opened up a food pantry where we immediately started servicing the needs of our communities in various cities. We have 104 chapters of National Action Network. And we opened up food pantries in our offices, in our various chapters. We partner with World Central Kitchen and other outlets, and we gave free food to the community. And we did it. We fed over 1 million people worldwide. And we are still doing that. We'll do that for Christmas Day. We did that on Thanksgiving. And so we have started to really address on the ground the needs. We're talking about job inequality. We're talking about education inequality. We're talking about housing issues. We're talking about, so many things that people are affected by. Now we are the epicenter for this crisis, for all these crisis situations. And what does that look like? So when a George Floyd incident happens and National Action Network is called to the scene, because that's what happens, we've had this crisis situation, this crisis center that's open 7 days a week. This is the center that victims call who need assistance or who have been wrongly, accused or convicted or victimized in some kind of way. They call National Action Network, and we respond to the call. And so when a George Floyd incident happens and everyone's attention goes towards this incident, it's National Action Network that, has to still strategize to protect the victims, to advocate on the issues, and to deal with these issues of police misconduct and the issue that's going on, on the ground. And so there's layers to this. And me, Dominique, I'm also an actress and producer. That's my passion. And so what I've started to do in this pandemic situation with these issues that are now, being confronted worldwide, we've started to figure out how these important things that are affecting us systematically, how we can translate that through theater and translate that to, the artistic and creative community that we depend on to uplift us, that we depend on to encourage us, that we depend on to give us hope and joy. And so one thing that I right now, one project that I'm working on right now, I'm working with Susan Charlotte with Food for Thought Productions, and I'm working with her play on voter suppression. We have a huge, a huge election that's coming up January 5th in the state of Georgia, and as we are looking at how politics and government and how our democracy is being challenged every day, and we are looking at how we as individuals are engaged in that process, whether we're affected by it, physically or directly, or we're affected by it by seeing how things are affecting our families or the communities we live in. So this production, we're going to Atlanta, Georgia on January 5th, on Election Day in Georgia, and we're presenting this production that she wrote on voter suppression. And we're going to have that discussion with people who have never voted before. People don't understand. There's a demographic of young people, 17 years old, who were not able to vote in the presidential election, who turned 18 between November 5th and January 5th, who can vote for the first time in this special election. We have to be there for them. We have to tell and teach them the voting process and make sure that their voices are being activated and energized, And so that's just one example of one thing that I've been working on. But the content is there, and there's so many stories and so many issues just with individual people that we can utilize to bring this message, so important to our creative realm. And so I hope to talk with everyone more about those possibilities, and certainly you, Bob. And I thank you for your leadership because you've been awesome. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So basically, I want to turn this into a conversation with my five panelists. Jane, thank you for raising your hand. What I was going to say is, I'm going to throw out some ideas, and if you want to respond to them, raise your hand so I can call on you. As you know, on Zoom, two voices never can happen at the same time. So, Jane, you go.
Yeah, I was struck by things that both Adam and Dominique said. And Dominique, I think we're actually sort of two sides of the same coin, in that we've started with the theater, but part of, and an integral part of what we do is engage with community partners. It's essential, and we do that in a couple of different ways. One is by offering tickets to those groups, so that it's often populations that don't normally see theater and don't normally see themselves on stage. So that's one. And then the second part of that is so that they become part of the conversation and continue the conversation, you know, away from the stage. So that's something. And so I'm struck by the fact that you've started with the issues and are moving to theater in order to share them. And I think that's, we're sort of coming to the same place, but from different perspectives. And Adam, I wrote down a values led, as I think that's something that is not necessarily limited to just the nonprofit world. I'm in my other life, I'm a commercial producer, and I think we have Bob. We have someone in common whose motto is, whose personal mission is changing the world one theatergoer at a time, and it's the reason I was attracted to Houses on the Moon. But it's also what I try to do in my commercial, wearing my commercial hat, most recently with the Prom. And I think many of you know that the Prom movie has come out, and one thing that I've been struck with, you know, 2 years ago Thanksgiving, the Prom appeared in the parade, and two young women kissed on live television, and everybody's head exploded because it had never been done before. Last week, the Prom appeared on Netflix to millions of people, and the comments were about James Corden and whether he was the right person for the role, and the presence of a story, an international story, based on the lives of two young women that just wanted to go to the Prom, wasn't the main point of the discussion. It was taken for, it's like, sure, we can have a story about two young gay women. And I think that's like, wow, how much progress has been made. And I think part of what we can do with entertainment, theater doesn't have quite the same audience as film does, but you certainly can have a lot of audience bringing things so that they become part of the ordinary, you know, that we have diverse audiences, that we have diverse people on stage, that we have diversity of people who are creating things. And then it becomes, this is the way it's supposed to be. And we're all striving for that, just, you know, different parts, different spokes of the wheel.
Gayle.
Yeah, I want to dovetail on what Jane brought up, which is so important, and that is community partnerships, because we don't own the issue. The community is very much a part of what goes on in our communities, in our societies. And there are not-for-profit organizations. If the issue, for instance, is gun reform, we're going to partner with the Brady Center, for instance, on, you know, fighting safe gun control, you know, use of guns. And for instance, you know, going back and revisiting a production, you know, when we did Church and State, that was before the Parkland shooting. And then on the anniversary of the Parkland shooting, we took that production and had colleges and universities across the country put that up so that young voters, new voters, could understand issues that were very important and also commemorate a catastrophe that took place. And the Brady Center had representatives in all of those cities where those colleges and universities were to educate those young students on the issues of safe gun use. And, you know, they learned then that the issue wasn't as political as they thought, because 85% of Republicans were not against safe gun use. It was more about money and power and special interest groups. And so this whole education took place around a theatrical production that we were able to take from an off-Broadway stage, use a community partner, put it into colleges and universities, commemorate the Parkland shooting, and also use it as an opportunity to make sure that these students were registered to vote. So I think that art has a unique power to bring people together. And I think it also has a unique opportunity to heal. The University of Indiana conducted some research recently. They actually have a school of philanthropy. I think it might be one of the only ones. And they learned that, they studied that there is very much a power to art and healing. And they also recently determined that only 8.9% of all giving goes to art and culture. So there's a schism there in the amount of money that goes to support art and culture and the amount of power that art has, you know, both for healing and somewhat for change. And one of the other things we do is we try to also partner with colleges and universities, there's social science departments, to see if that we can find out how change is measured after a group of people have seen a production. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of different mechanisms going on, but there's no doubt in my mind, especially with theater, that each audience is a community unto themselves, that they're experiencing something intimately together, and the power to start a conversation, heal, and something magical happens.
Can I just say that my personal belief is that the key to changing the world is changing minds, basically having people understand things in different ways. And what art does in general, and what theater can do very specifically, is introduce people to ideas they might not accept otherwise, but you're welcoming them into a world and giving them a chance to digest these ideas over 90 minutes or 2 hours or 30 minutes, whatever it is. Would anybody want to comment on what I'm saying now, or just, yeah, Adam?
Absolutely. I think that the ability for art and theater particularly to change minds and also illuminate possibilities, right? We get into a conversation around visibility and the power of that, right? And I think about a purist sense of looking at art or theater, that it can be art for art's sake, where there's a kind of a radical fundamental element or essence towards our art making that can be removed from some of these uncomfortable truths or this uncomfortable social engagement. But I wish we lived in a world where art wasn't a class issue, right? But the actual potential that we all know is so available for the arts has become a stratified issue, right? So it demands for us to live up to the mandate and the potential for our art form. It demands us to get into different ecosystems, to get into out of echo chambers, right? And to do that work to bring art to other communities. And I think about the topic of community partnership. And I wonder where the opportunity can continue in this real relationship building that turns into reciprocal growth and development, so that we're engaging community partners, not just on topical issues, but because of relationship. And because one show might bring you into this realm of art making, but our relationship is actually creating new innovation and creativity, so that LGBT issues are not remote to gun violence issues, and race issues are not different than gender issues, right? So that we're actually, because our relationships are strong and are not just built on a topical show that might come in and out right? That our relationship is actually based off of commitment to community. And we're actually seeing how all of these different communities don't have to be left out of the conversation for any particular issue or any type of art making.
Jane, I see you'd like to make a comment.
Yeah, Adam, you make a great point, and I think any of us that have ongoing theaters, as opposed to one-off kinds of shows, hope that every time we do a new topic or have a new conversation, we draw in new audiences, and they stick around,
Yeah.
and cross-pollinate, and some of these things are, I mean, doing a show, you know, I think theater that's successful is theater that's personal, and the personal becomes universal. So, you know, Houses on the Moon, we're storytellers, and whether we're telling that story on stage, whether we're telling it, you know, we've all been pivoting in some ways, and so we're taking some of our work and creating a podcast, and the podcast, to show you the importance, our podcast has three parts to it. There's a story, there's an interview with the storyteller, and then there's a community partner that talks about how we've interacted on the issue and what more can be done. And these are people that we've worked with for years, and not just on one issue, because there's so many issues that intersect with each other. So if it's bullying is not, it's not limited, unfortunately, to one population, or gun violence does not just affect one population. It may be disproportionate in its effects, but building community for the theater is also part of it, and building a community for the theater helps build community and cross-pollinate within the communities, so that people become more aware of each other's issues, and, you know, maybe we become better people. You know, that's my hope, my dream. It may be a fantasy, but that's part of having a theater company versus doing commercial productions one at a time, where you have to start from scratch each time you're doing it.
One thing
If
that's
that makes sense.
painfully obvious to all of us is that, well, beyond the fact that there's systemic racism in the entire country, there is a certain lack of inclusion even in our theater communities, and we're all working consciously to change that, and some are working more effectively than others. Can I ask my guests to talk about a little bit about what steps people can take in order to be demonstrably more inclusive as theater makers? Jane, you want to jump in?
Sure. I mean, Ludovica is already doing that in terms of gender parity. I think it starts with an awareness that we have conscious choices to make. And I know Ludovica primarily from our work together on the board of the League of Professional Theater Women. And there was a movement, we called it one more conversation. So the idea being, if you're hiring someone, have one more conversation that includes a woman, or have one more conversation that includes a person of color, or one more conversation that includes someone that you're not used to talking to. And it involves work. And that's why having databases of women, there's an organization that has a database of BIPOC artists that makes it a little bit easier to find people that aren't in your necessarily in your circle. You know, I think with Houses on the Moon, since our stories are often about the unheard voice, and often that means marginalized communities, they're often written by or impact or have characters that are not of the mainstream. So it sort of becomes part of what we do to have more diversity in our storytelling. But we can do better and have one more conversation for every time we want to hire a designer, or you know, whatever, people who are part of the production. And also in trying to attract audiences so that there's more diversity in every single part of what we do. We've done that with our board. In fact, one of our board members is part of Adam's group, Rashad Chambers, who is a colleague of mine on the commercial side and has joined our board, but conscious effort to make sure that we had representation on our board as well.
So let me move this to you, Adam, if you don't mind, because this is at the heart of one of the initiatives that you're a part of. What is it that you ask us to do to be more inclusive and more conscious of more conscious in our dealings every day with our communities?
Absolutely. Yeah, the conversations have to be baked in. I think it's about the integration of it. As I was mentioning earlier, not about having diversity or inclusion be a specific topic, right, of your work, but actually be integrated into all of your work, right? In the same way that we think about our principles of professionalism, right, or of courtesy, or our standards of excellence, that diversity and inclusion actually is a standard of excellence, right? It shouldn't have to be something that has to get baked in after or post fact. I think about that as we think about our intersectionality, right? It is so much easier to have intentional conversations around what access looks like for our theater making at the beginning of a production process, rather than thinking about it once you move into the theater, right? It actually can create more innovation. And what we know from research and statistical information from all disciplines, not just in the arts, we know that diversity and inclusion actually is a value. It's a value add for every community. It creates more innovation. It creates more nuanced thinking. It creates a wide plethora of resource sharing and perspective to the table so that you can create the best work. So starting off your process by understanding what modes of operation am I operating in that removes us from taking the time that is required. This hashtag of one more conversation, really, that's about disrupting a critical mode of white supremacy that is about time urgency, right? We have to move at this rate, right, to get something done. However, if you are taking the time to disrupt that thinking and saying, hey, actually, we can take the time and be intentional and have one more interview, have one more conversation with someone who there's an abundance of potential out there, right? But because of certain modes of operation that prevent us from taking time or disrupting certain white supremacist structures or norms, we stay in the same way, and therefore we stay working in the same small pools, right? So sometimes it's really about just like being intentional enough to interrogate your process and have that be baked in from the top.
Dominique, I have a question for you. You're firmly planted in two different worlds. The political world is you live in, born into it. You also love the theater world. What would you like each of those worlds to teach each other?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Teach each other that we're no different than one another. We all are here. We all have the capabilities to inspire. We are all born with a specific purpose. My dad tells me all the time, you have a passion and a purpose in you that has nothing to do with me. Even if I walk outside and everyone associates me with him, I still know that I'm Dominique and I bring something unique to this world. We all do. So how can we just come together and continue that? Like, how can we come together and realize and understand living and breathing it every day? Like Adam said, just taking it in to what we do on a daily basis, that we're all here to do something magical and unique. And when we bring that collective together, can you imagine how much stronger and how much powerful and how much more beautiful we are? You know, it's a win-win. So that's really what I want. I want everyone to know that we're all here together. We're all here to do something unique and magical, and it's your business to make that happen.
Okay, thank you. That's a good answer. That's a pretty thorough answer. Ludovica, what changes have you seen since you started Parity Productions? Are things getting any better? Are you?
Yes, I do think they're getting better, very slowly. And I think it also depends on what pool you look at. You know, if you look at independent theatre, I think there's definitely an opening of doors. I think when you go higher up the ladder, the chain, the pyramid, the mountain, whatever you want to call it, the food chain, I think it's less so. But I think what's happened this year has forced people, and that sounds as if I'm thinking it's negative, but I don't think that, has forced us to really take a look. And that is what's very important. And like Adam says, it has to begin with each of us individually. And each of us individually has to make choices. And then the whole thing about, you know, it's sort of a love-hate relationship with this sort of urgency that Adam was talking about. On the one hand, running a small not-for-profit, you're always putting out fires, you know, and that makes it very difficult to break some of those cycles. But it's something that we're absolutely looking at because it's essential. And I think, you know, what that whole thing about, you know, when you're trying to rush, you often make mistakes, or you're not, like this whole thing about intentionality, it's almost like being in a meditative state, being in a very aware or present way of responding and being. And that's interesting because that's bigger than us. That's almost looking at something spiritually. And I love that because I think that is what the world is asking of us right now, whether it's environmentally, you know, whether it's in the theatre, whether it's in the world, whether it's in politics, whether it's in finance. I mean, I think that's where we're going to turn to next if we haven't already done so, because I don't pay attention to that so much. Whoops, I suppose I should, but there's only so much we can do every day. 24 hours seems awfully short, but that is one place where we are made very equal. We each have those 24 hours and we have a choice as to how we spend them. So I'm not really answering your question, Bob. I'm really famous for that. Never mind, moving on. So really, to answer your question, yes, I believe there definitely has been change, but because we had so much change to make, it's sometimes overwhelming to see how much further we still have to go.
Agreed.
For example, now looking at anti-racism, it's been really depressing. You know, I've always thought we do good work. I've always thought, you know, we're making a difference. You know, we've been doing this thing for a while. And then to look at our own company and go, wow, okay, the urgency thing has to change in us. Definitely we have to look at that. You know, we do EDI meetings every week. I mean, not now on the holidays, but we do. And that's looking at inclusivity in different ways. It's looking at disability, it's looking at race, it's looking at absolutely everything. And there are things we have not looked at, you know, and so from thinking we're doing the work to going, no, you're doing part of the work. And that has been very humbling, extremely depressing, very anxiety provoking, and ultimately fantastic, because, you know, I think it's been said several times today, you know, the art we make has to reflect the world we live in. And the creators of that art also have to reflect the world we live in. And I think if we do these things intentionally, we're going to be in a much stronger place, and which I think has already been said today. So I'm just repeating that because I think it bears, it's worth repeating. And it is individual work. And yeah, I think I should stop now. Yeah, because that was not the question.
And now while Ludovica takes a breath, Jane has her hand up. So Jane, did you want to add something? Because there's something I want to say also.
Yeah, it was a segue, but I'm going to say it anyway. It seems like it's a non sequitur now, but um, I sort of have a question for the group, because I think there's a little bit of a conflict between who tells the story and the stories that get told, and I think it's important that both of those things are represented. That you know, there's, I think we have the fear that, some, if white men can't tell the story of a woman's story, or a black man can't tell a white person's story, or a woman can't tell a man's story. um, i'm I'm concerned with both, that that I want to see the stories being, if you're sitting in the audience, you don't necessarily know who wrote the story, but you know what the story is. And I think it's important that there's, the people in the audience can see themselves on stage. And maybe I can't write your story, Dominique, but because I can't write, so that's part of it. But I I I think there's, I'm putting it out to the group about, would you rather have a story written by, someone who isn't normally represented, but it not necessarily represent their population well, or have a story that is a well-told story that isn't necessarily written by that population?
Oh,
Can I answer that?
sorry, I have to jump in. I know I'm not a panelist, I'm supposed to be a moderator, but I have to say that for what you're talking about, I think is something we can aspire to later. I think right now, I think the stories need to be told. And the reason why we have this whole problem is there aren't enough people in positions of authority, commercial producers, artistic directors, who actually have a vested interest in those stories we don't hear told. We have to create more producers. When we create more producers of color, BIPOC producers, disabled producers, whatever, we just have to get more producers so that more stories will be told. Once we get to the place where the stories that aren't being told are being told, it won't matter as much who is telling them. But I think right now it does matter.
It definitely matters.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'll just say it definitely matters, Bob, and you're right. I think that like Adam said, like you said, it's fine to tell the story of whomever you want to tell the story to, but how can you tell someone else's story without consulting them, without having them, someone with the lived experience in the room, to help you to make sure that the story is being told correctly? That's, I think, an issue that, that we shy away from, and that we, it's something that we, easily we're removed from it easily, but it's something that's important that we should incorporate moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll just add that there's a concept of representational justice here that we need to be thinking about, how we can restore representation in areas. And there's always going to be an abundance, right? If you're either operating from a idea of scarcity, or you're operating from abundance. So the stories are out there, the narratives have always been present. So if you're taking on a narrative where you feel drawn to it, and you're not representing it, but you feel called to it, there's kind of a restorative representation mandate on you. There's a responsibility to be also a fulcrum to that representation, right? If you cannot be the representation for this, there's kind of a responsibility for you to also direct and amplify, right? That restorative representation can also look like, well, we've had a historic majority of one type of representation at the forefront. So that means that we should have a priority on a different type of representation, right? So you can think about this concept in various different ways, to think about equity, to think about parity, to think about restoring a balance, right? If I'm taking from one type of opportunity, visibility, representation, how can I either step aside and make space for that representation, or how can I act as a fulcrum or as a foil to that representation to amplify their work while I'm doing my work as well?
Yeah, I feel for NewYorkRep and for myself as a producer and an artist, that I have a full responsibility to do that. If I'm researching and writing or producing a piece about racism in our prison system and prison reform as a result of that, that piece has to have artists around it that have some experience in the culture, that have led these people's lives that we're featuring to this predicament in their lives, you know, we make sure that we make sure that there's a playwright involved that's aware of what it was like to grow up like that, and certainly a director who is aware of what it's like to grow up like that, and also that those, to your point before, that those communities are served throughout the process, that they're able to come see the show, that they're involved, that they sit around my living room table if that's where we're meeting, and they're part of the input process, and they're part of the readings, and they give us input all the way through. There are partners from the beginning to the end. And if we don't have that representation from the time we get their stories to the people that are supporting their stories, writing their stories, directing their stories, we're not going to get the same story. It's just not represented correctly.
I'd like to also jump in and say, because I know that some of the writers are disturbed by this, that absolutely artists are empathetic. Artists have the ability to understand other people's stories. That's true. I don't disagree with that. And I do think that if a story is you passionately want to tell that story, nobody should tell you not to tell it. I'm just saying that right now we're in a period where we really need to have more diverse voices who are, I mean, not more plays about diversity, but more diverse voices that are heard. So yes, you might be taking somebody else's place in line if you jump in and write a story about their experience. Again, you're empathetic, you're an artist, you understand, you probably will write something fine. But I think that it's important to let the people whose story it really is be in some way involved with it, and also understand that, aren't we all told as writers, write what you know? I mean, shouldn't we really be writing about our own experiences? I know that's really can be debated, but just be sensitive to the fact that we do not have equal representation right now in our theater, in our communities, in our culture, and if we're going to make any kind of change, we really have to be conscious about that, and conscious about the importance of having the actual voices be heard. And again, I'll go back to what I said before. That will only happen when we have enough people that are vested in having those voices be heard. Those people that have similar experiences. We need more producers of color. We need more producers that are diverse. We really need them. If you're listening and you're out there, please, we need you.
Having originated the question, I asked the question because I've been having a lot of conversations about this topic from actors who don't want to play a role that if it's not written by someone who looks like them, and by producers who are worried about telling stories. And I really did it to generate the response. And I think it's a very controversial topic right now. To me, the importance is if you have a story being told, that you have a team of people who can weigh in. Ultimately, it's in theater, the writer is the person who controls the words. If you don't like the words, then you just don't produce the play. But I think it's something that we have to be very sensitive to, and have a diversity of voice in the room, not just by race, not just by gender, but by age, by class. Like there's a lot of different voices that impact a story, and not every story is about race, not every story is about gender. Some of the stories are just about everyday life, but just being sensitive to having different voices in the room when we're telling those stories.
Well, that's our little excursion into extreme controversy.
It's activism. How do you not have?
I do want to go back to that question, whether whether political theater is activism, whether theater is, I always think that, at its heart, theater is always political, because it's basically showing human behavior, and art is political. The purpose of art is to show the world to people in ways that they may not have seen it before. So how can it not be political? I don't want to be overstating it, though. I don't know whether you think I'm foolish for taking that position. Anyone? Nobody's saying anything. Okay.
A like-minded panel here, I think that the paradigm of the politic has to be engaged with if we want an audience to exchange, if we want there to be social impact. There's the work in isolation, in vacuum, but it's actually not alive until it's exchanged. And that, in theory, is a political process, right? It's an ideological sharing, rebuffing, finessing, and maneuvering process. And that's what I think propels the culture forward, that very tension.
I'm going to invite the room to raise their virtual hands if they have something that they would like to ask, because I think we can start opening up to questions from the room. I'm not going to ask you to come into the room, but at least raise your hand and put your audio on so that you can ask your question. Anyone? This happens every time. It's like, and then if I say, okay, well, that about, okay, there we get a hand. Tita, please ask your question or make your comment.
Well, I lots of comments, but I have a question. I'm curious about when we have a play that is trying to bridge a gap over people that really disagree. For example, Americans on left, right. Any thoughts about how you get audience members who hear about what it's about and they disagree with it and then they ain't coming? I mean, for a play to be activist and reach people that don't already agree.
Right, exactly. How do we preach to something other than the choir?
Yeah.
I'll take a stab at that. I think whether it's advertisement or anything, the advertisers would tell us that people don't notice something until they've seen it, 7 times or 10 times, or the number keeps going up and up. That it's all about impression, and I think that there's a lot of ways that we can reach people. But the example I used about the prom, for example, which is, I don't know how, like, so many more people are going to see the movie of the prom than the play, and they're seeing a story with these amazing stars in it, and the story itself is already accepted. They've just seen this story about a couple of gay kids and how in the town of this small town in Indiana comes to accept them, and it just becomes part of the zeitgeist. And whether it's casting people, just whoever's best for the role, as opposed to specific racial or gender casting, so that what things look like on stage becomes normal for people and not strange to see. To see, I don't know, going back to the Cosby Show, for example, forgetting individual foibles of Bill Cosby, but when that show went on television and there was a Black family portrayed as professional and educated, it changed a lot of minds. Or when Will and Grace came on and there were professional gay men, or man anyway, it just changed a lot of minds because it became part of what was accepted in our society. Not that any of this is perfect yet. And I think that if this branch of political theater, social justice work, if it's portrayed that way, yeah, it's probably true that most of the people who come to see a piece of political theater are already on the bandwagon. But it's also possible that some people aren't. Or we try to do theater in the gray area. It's not, you know, it's not preaching. It's complicated characters, and some of them are troubled and some of them aren't. And you can go both ways in how you view it. And the more times someone will go see something that's not the way they think, it's just chipping away a little bit. I don't think that if someone comes to see a play at Houses on the Moon, they're suddenly going to go from being a Trump supporter to being a radical liberal, but it may just give them an insight into something that they didn't think about before. And I'll give a very specific example, if I might. Our play Shared Sentences about families of people who have family members incarcerated. We performed that at our gala a couple of years ago, and a colleague of mine came up afterwards and was really shook up by it. And she opened her wallet very generously and just said, this is something I just had no idea about. It's not something that I experience in my circle of friends, an upper class, white, you know, in living in a very exclusive area. She doesn't have a lot of friends who have family members who are incarcerated, and it just blew her mind. You know, to me, it was a huge success just to see one more person, one theater goer at a time.
We have a lot of questions, but I do want to jump in for a second and to say that it's the job of every artist to fairly portray and fully portray every character that we write. And the point really is, I always try to remind people, villains do not know they're villains. So if you're actually presenting humanity and you're presenting the issue, even if you are taking a stand, if you present it humanly, I think that you can have other people in the audience who may not agree with you, and they won't be offended and throw things at the stage. So let me also go on to some of the comments. Elizabeth Layton.
Hi. I think that this panel was probably created, in my mind, to tackle the problem of lack of diversity at all levels. For example, Bob, you've been pointing out, where is the diversity with Black producers of plays, Black directors of plays? Where are all these producers that we need of different colors? Where are all these directors that we need of different colors? That's diversity that I would like to see happen. The second issue, completely different, is what I've been talking about. My 32-year-old son hangs with people of all different colors, and he doesn't really think about it. You know, the younger generation is like bringing with them this whole open-mindedness, and it's not exactly colorblind, but it's inclusive, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. I just saw a film that was part of a Brown University new award deal in the second annual year. And the film was 7 minutes long, and it was called Color. And it was fantastic.
Elizabeth,
and the black girl basically says, well, we all know that Blacks make the best music.
Okay, Elizabeth, did you want to ask the panel anything?
No, I'm sorry. I'm just on my soapbox.
Okay, well, soapbox shut down now. Neil, did you want to ask anything? Oh, also, I was told Adam Ray Siegel. I was told that you would raise your hand when Jane was talking. Did you want to ask a comment about something?
No, the other Adam.
No, you've got it. You touched on it.
Oh, Adam. Oh, okay.
Can I speak now?
Yeah, Neil, you
called me.
No.
Yeah, I wanted to comment first of all on what Jane said. You know, do you get someone who has experienced the what they're going to write about, or do you get a good writer? And first of all, you know, many of these things, these are shows that we would be doing that have a quote unquote message. And so far, the best way to get a message across in a show is to do it subtly. Church and state is a great example of that. Gayle mentioned it before. But nonetheless, as
I'm
a
sorry,
producer,
I'm sorry, Neil, I want to interrupt you because
sure.
that's not what I said. What I said was, would you rather have a story that represents, let's just say it's a story about women. Would you rather have a story that represents women positively, written by a man, or a story written by a woman that does not represent women well?
Okay.
I'm not implying that you can't have a writer that writes well. I'm asking whether you'd rather have the story told that represents what you're trying to say in a better light,
Fair enough.
written by someone who's not part of that community.
Yeah. Well, I can address that too. Specifically, that one. I was doing my Lysistrata piece. I want a woman to write it because I wanted her viewpoint. But even if it wasn't exactly what you said, I would rather have somebody, given that I'm a producer and I want people to come to the theater and people come to see a good story, to get someone who is a good writer and yes, work with that person. If someone, just as I say, just because somebody has an experience, whether it be
I'm going to stop you just to say that basically I think we all would agree that we want whatever story we're telling, we want it to be told well, and we all agree that there are some people who are telling their own story and don't tell it well, and there's some people who's telling someone else's story who can tell it better. I think what we're trying to say is that right now, just because there is an imbalance, we need to make room for as many voices as possible, non-white Jewish voices. So I think that's all. I think that's all we're really trying to say.
Yeah, I also want to point out, I think in this comment and in the previous, that there's kind of a subconscious value judgment placed into these statements, in that folks who are underrepresented have a lack of quality, right? That there's some sort of compromise in our movement towards inclusion. And in the previous statement, I heard a bit about is the question about where are the Black producers, Black creatives, Black directives, or is the question, why have I not done the labor to find these creatives and practitioners who are here?
Right.
Yeah, that wasn't what I was trying to say, Bob.
We got to move on, Neil. Ludovica.
I just address that because Adam, I've been dying to say this, and I agree with you 100%. I remember when I started Works by Women, one of the things that we used to hear so much was, yeah, but we want the work to be good. And I kept going, but why do you make the assumption that just because you don't know about this particular person who happens to be a woman, just by the way, why are you assuming that it's not good? It's this fear of the unknown, which is why having databases or having tools which has information is essential, because then we can actually look and go, aha, then we see it, it's in front of us, and when you're saying do the labor, some people won't. And so having it presented to them, I think I'm not suggesting, Adam, by the way, we shouldn't be doing our work, but I am saying, let's make it easy.
But also building the relationships. So you can get a database, you can log onto a database, but that doesn't give you the humanly touch that is going to be essential to get your project across. So developing the relationships is also very essential. Doing, networks like this, and bringing people together and meeting people and getting to know what's out there is very essential. So like Adam said, you got to do the labor.
I agree.
That I really want to say, can I be heard? Yeah. Okay. The thing I wanted to say is that the voices that haven't gotten as much airtime as other voices sound different, and so a lot of us don't have the ear to know that that voice is worth producing. We make these judgments because we're comparing the lesser heard voice to the voices that we've heard all the time. So we have to be a little bit more forgiving, and we have to understand that our ears have to adjust. We have to learn how other people talk. We have to stop being used to hearing people talk the way we talk. Is that okay?
And there's another issue, Bob, as well, which is, and it makes me sort of upset, because if you haven't had opportunity, maybe you're not going to be the best person at that job. But could you just step back a minute and give them the chance? Give people, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, whether it's disability, I don't care what it is. You know, if you've not been able to do it, how on earth are you going to be the best person at it? You'd be bloody lucky if you were. You have to do the thing. And that's what is difficult. It's about opportunity. When somebody said access earlier, it's about access. You know, it's about getting out of the way and giving space. And I think that, and Bob, I think we're saying the same thing. This is the time we must do the work. And then I think we're going to have much more interesting theatre. We're going to have, ironically, something that producers want, full theatres. Because why should I come and see your bloody play? I don't see myself there. I just don't see anything about me in it. So why am I going to go? I'm not interested. So that will all change if we make these changes now. And some of the changes are painful. Well, you know what? Change is difficult. That's just the way it is.
Amen.
Yeah, it is.
Jane wanted to add that, then I'm going to have Murray.
Yeah, for those people who don't know me, you may know that I'm a little bit of a provocateur. And I asked the question that I asked specifically because based on the conversations I was having, I knew it would be provocative. And I think, you know, the theater motto of show, don't tell. It was my way of showing that when you bring something up and not everybody agrees, that you have a conversation, and maybe everybody is still wherever they were before this conversation. But I'm hoping that by discussing it, everybody moves just a little bit. And then by the 10th time they've discussed it, they've moved even more. And I think that's the intersection of art and politics, and the idea of the 10 impressions before things really happen. So I hope it was interesting.
It was a great topic for us to be able to discuss, and I thank you for bringing it up. Murray and then Yvette, and then we're going to probably have to wrap up. But Murray.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone here because I love hearing your stories and what you've been doing. I have a bigger question, and I would love to get an answer if it's possible. I made a career change from hospitality, the magazine world, into theater 7 years ago. And in hospitality, you work with hotels, restaurants, retail, attractions, spas, art and antique stores, airlines, and maybe other places. And never once, and I do mean never once, and I'm only 23, but for 25 years I was working in the industry. And diversity and inclusion, there were words that were never used because the best person always was hired for the job. All right. And I come to this industry and it amazes me what is going on, the fact that everything got created because it hasn't ever happened here. And I don't understand. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, it's like, if there are industries where that's not been an issue, I mean, I never even thought of color or race or gay or straight, nothing. And that was everybody. That was just the entire industry. So
Mary, okay, we've heard your point. Does anybody want to respond?
I would love it. Yeah.
I'll respond. I would basically say that I doubt that there's an industry that has no problem with systemic racism. I know that you may not have had the personal experience with it, but it's probably within the industry elsewhere where you're not looking. So I wouldn't assume that this problem doesn't exist everywhere. I think it's everywhere.
I guess I would ask the question of who owned the hotels and the magazines and the stores and the et cetera, that were in your industry. I'm guessing that there wasn't a real diverse representation in the ownership and the higher ranks. Maybe where you were operating, there wasn't. But I find it hard to believe that 10 years ago this wasn't as much of a problem as it is today.
If you walked into the hotels or the stores or the places, you saw everybody was visibly represented, whether they were represented at the top levels, I never analyzed it, but the discussions were not always about that. It didn't seem to come up as much as it does in this.
Dominique?
I'm gonna prolong the panel, so I'm just gonna, yeah. I will say that you probably just need to just recheck your sources, because I'm sure those corporations, they have diversity and inclusion officers that were appointed, I mean, like, it's a whole, there's layers to this. So maybe we should continue a conversation offline, and I'm happy to do so with you. But yeah, I definitely disagree that it didn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yvette.
Just to piggyback on what you all are saying, I feel like before the knee was on George Floyd's neck, we were having a lot of conversation about diversity and welcoming different people into our theaters, welcoming people of color, writers and all. There was conversation that did exist before that. I think the work today that Ludovica didn't say it explicitly, but I think the work today is around anti-racism training. Just like we have sexual harassment training, we have gender bias training, anti-racist training needs to be something that every theater in our country is doing or needs to do. I don't see how there can be any change in the American theater or in the fabric of America in any walk of life or business if people aren't examining their own biases. I'm Black, and in taking racial bias training, I had to look at my own biases. So none of us are free of it, because racism is a part, it's the air we breathe, it's the water we're swimming in, it's all around us. So no one is immune from that. So I just want to thank you, Jane, for the question, and Bob for your answer, and the panelists. But the work that needs to be done now is all about anti-racist training, because I don't think anything can change unless that happens. That you have to have the courage to do the introspection, to look at your family history, whether you own slaves or not, whether you came over the Middle Passage or not. Like, we have to examine our history. Okay, this happened, and now what can I do? How can I? It's what one of the panelists said about value-led theater. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Absolutely. And I'll also say that anti-racism is so fundamental because it's a process, and it speaks to a practice that we all need to take on, and that there is no arrival to it, right? It takes all of our collective engagement in a practice that must continue. Right? There's no arrival to it. And I will also say, to this point, or over the last progressive 10 years or so, within industries or in the theater realm, there has been a prioritizing of ED&I work, right? But equity, diversity, inclusion, that type of work actually is just it's really in the service of white learning. It's in the service of vocabulary building. It's not in the service of practice, analysis, and actionable change. So anti-racism is a process that must be engaged in, and it has to continue because there's no arrival.
Well, on that note of
Bob, it's Yvette. I want to say we've had 400 years of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow laws and all of that. We've had 400 years of that. Only since 1954 have we moved into an area where things are opening up, where our awareness is being changed. So we're sort of still toddlers on the stage of human history, or in the stage of American history. All this is still new. So when Adam says it's a process, it is going to take time, and theater will serve it and help our fellow Americans to understand it and look within themselves. Anyway,
Yeah,
we have to do the work. White and Black, purple, green, we all have to do the work.
Gayle, then Jane.
Yeah, I just want to say that this is one of the most important panels I've ever been on, and I have not just been a participant, but I've been a student tonight. I've learned so much from my other panelists, so I wanted to say thank you, and even for the questions, and Bob, just for spearheading this really important discussion. It's so much to take in, and we have such a responsibility. And I know that we all take it very seriously. And theater is such an opportunity to make a difference and chip away at this. So thank you.
Jane.
Yeah, what she said. But also, I think it's also incumbent upon each of us in whatever role that we're playing. You know, theater is just one way of representing the world. Sorry, I lost you, Dominique.
I'm in
but
this
also,
chat. I had to check out the chat.
oh,
The chat is lit, as they say.
yeah. But we're also audience members, and we can choose to see the theater that best represents the world and not see the theater that doesn't. We're also writers and directors and designers, and as writers in theater, writers have a lot of power, and you can insist upon better representation or better diversity or better perspective in the team that's built around you. You have that power. And so I think whatever role that we're playing, whether we're producers or writers or actors or designers or stage managers or whatever, that we can play a role in making things move to a better place. We may be still in our infancy in this process, but we all have a role to play.
Ludovica. Unmute yourself, honey.
So sorry. Just one quick sentence that I stole from someone. I just don't know who. Be the change you want to see. End of subject.
Okay. Final words from anyone else? Okay, we're going to actually wrap this up now. It's been an amazing conversation. I'm humbled to have presented it tonight. And I want to thank Jane, Gayle, Ludovica, Adam, and Dominique for being challenging, honest, open. I'm very grateful for you, and maybe we can do this again. I'll see whether we can fit it into our schedule and into your schedule and come back and talk some more, because this is something that needs to constantly be talked about every day and thought about every day. I just want to let everybody know that this is the end of year. Normally we would be having a benefit and we would be making money to go into 2021. We don't have that now. We will be doing a benefit to try to make up for it in January. But if you want to support us, if you want to give a donation, please consider going to trueonline.org, truonline.org / all lowercase / make-a-donation, trueonline.org / make-a-donation, all lowercase. And I also hope that you'll come and support the benefit at the end of January, beginning of February. This is basically, the benefit is my way of expressing everything that we've been talking about in this panel tonight. Also a reminder that we're a membership group. If you're not a member of True, that also helps us keep going if you join as a member. So just, again, go to TrueOnline, truonline.org, make a donation, join as a member, or send me an email and say hi, whatever. I want to wish everybody a very happy holiday season. Please stay safe. We have a vaccine, so I always like to say now, Vaccine New Year, everybody. It's not going to change everything right away, so don't get too over eager about breaking social restrictions, rules. We have to continue to socially distance, and we have to continue to wear masks. We have to continue to be really careful and really stay healthy, because we need all of you to make art in 2021 when we're back and healthy and live again. So that's it. Thank you, everyone.